Welcome back. As the United Kingdom gets set to once again go into lockdown as a result of the second wave of COVID-19, the government of St. Lucia is keeping a close eye on the impact that this will undoubtedly have on St. Lucia. Prime Minister Alan Chastanet as well as Tourism Minister Dominic Fedee both say the impending closure and its effects should be seen as an indicator of the seriousness of the COVID-19 pandemic.
On Thursday, November 5th, the United Kingdom is once again going into lockdown as a direct response to flatten the curve of the second wave of COVID-19, the pandemic that continues to affect the globe. Whilst this is a response that has seen proven positive results in the different countries that practiced it, it has become a cause for concern right here in St. Lucia, who just last week celebrated the return of flights to the island via British airliner TUI. The 30-day shutdown has led to the suspension of flights between St. Lucia and the UK. Tourism Minister Dominic Fedee expressed concerns over the current situation.
The current situation is a very stark indication of how serious we have to take the management of COVID-19, because we see now how much is at stake. There are some 5,000 employees that were back in the industry. 80% of the room stock which were open are now at risk of being temporarily closed. This has been a great disruptor to all of the economic gains that we have made. And so now it becomes very, very difficult for us to come back from this.
Prime Minister Alan Chastanet echoed the concerns of the Tourism Minister and added that efforts will be made to facilitate British nationals already in St. Lucia.
Part of the lockdown is that they have suspended both domestic travel or vacationing in the UK, as well as international travel. We're still working on some of the details in terms of the tourists that are here, but my understanding is that once the airlines continue to fly, the persons who are already here will be allowed to go back in to the UK. This is for a 30-day period, obviously in the first instance, and depending on how successful the lockdown is, I guess they will report back to us, to the world, in terms of what their intentions are. As you know, this obviously coincides with our own announcements last week of not locking down the country, but certainly in tightening our protocols to minimize the amount of social distancing.
The PM said in the meantime he is working towards increasing airlift coming out of the US to facilitate the reopening of a number of hotels around the island in the coming weeks. Reporting for Hot 7 News, I am Rochelle Gonzalez.
Thank you, Rochelle. The St. Lucia Employers Federation is making an appeal to all employers to adhere to the stricter guidelines which have been put in place by the government to limit the spread of COVID-19. Acting Executive Director of the St. Lucia Employers Federation, Goretti Paul, says that as much as possible, employers should implement procedures that allow for remote working of their employees. Nisha Charles reports.
Was one of the initial measures taken by government back in March to curb the spread of COVID-19. With the surge in cases over the last few weeks, government has had to revise the protocols and guidelines associated with managing the spread of the virus. Since then, the St. Lucia Employers Federation has come out urging employers to allow their employees the option of working remotely. Executive Director Goretti Paul says in instances where working from home may not be ideal, dialogue must be had between the parties.
As a federation, we encourage our members who are employers to ensure that all of the necessary protocols are followed as much as possible to reduce the risk to their employees. However, we understand that there may be situations where you cannot appease everybody's concern, and so have regular meetings. We encourage them to have regular meetings with their staff to ensure that concerns are raised and addressed in a timely manner so the employees feel safe in the working environment, because this is a trying time. We know that especially now with the increasing community spread, persons are going to be anxious, they are going to be, scared. A lot of persons are very concerned, and so paranoia might very well set in. You don't know. Everybody handles these things differently.
Paul says that while an employee may refuse to work under health and safety conditions, there are procedures that need to be followed.
Section 263 of the Labour Act makes a reference to refusal to work under health and safety grounds. However, there's a process. So we're not suggesting that person should just not show up for work and say, well, I don't feel safe, so I'm not coming. There is a requirement for dialogue between the parties. The employee should engage the employer and say, listen, I don't feel safe because of XYZ. Employer again has that responsibility to ensure that they investigate these concerns, take the necessary corrective steps to ensure that persons feel safe enough to continue to function within the working environment.
The new protocols will remain in effect until November 30, 2020. For the Hot 7 News, Nisha Charles reporting.
A small sigh of relief can be taken by St. Lucians after Information and Broadcasting Minister Dominic Fedee revealed on Monday that most of the data damaged during last week's security breach at the Government Information Service is retrievable. The nation was left shocked after over 100 terabytes of data and footage, including those of historic value, were deliberately destroyed.
On Thursday, October 29th, the Principal Information Officer of the Government Information Service, Davina Lee, made the devastating announcement that the GIS had been broken into and that hard drives containing over 100 terabytes of footage and information, many of the historic nature, were deliberately destroyed after a corrosive substance was poured over them. Immediately, the question was raised whether the footage was lost forever, with many left with the feeling of doubt and dread that a large part of St. Lucian history was forever wiped out. However, on Monday, Information and Broadcasting Minister Dominic Fedee delivered a message that served as a breath of fresh air.
It is backed up. She does have a lot of it on cloud. I don't know if she mentioned that in her statement, but upon meeting with her, she did indicate to me that she can retrieve quite a number of it. But it is a tedious process. I mean, because you've mentioned a whole lot of footage, a whole lot of information that has been there. So I think now is to go back and get a lot of the information online.
Fedee said the situation has left him scratching his head.
I think that it's highly curious what has taken place at the GIS, and I'm just going to allow the investigation to take place and to see what the police is going to come up with. There were a number of valuable pieces of equipment that could have been taken. Cameras, computers, a lot of expensive editing equipment, audio equipment, a lot of expensive stuff. So it looks like the individual, whoever did this, did so in a manner to come to destroy some information and not necessarily weren't interested in any economic gain, because a lot of the equipment and so on remained intact.
Fedee declined to answer whether he thought the break-in was politically motivated or not. Reporting for Hot 7 News, I am Rochelle Gonzalez.
The island's Prime Minister, Alan Chastanet, is urging all countries to adopt pre-testing as a prerequisite to travel to safeguard their citizens. This as a number of countries within the region are seeing spikes in COVID-19 cases. On Monday, the media questioned the Prime Minister as to what will happen to St. Lucians who travel within the CARICOM travel bubble.
The CARICOM travel bubble, which came into effect on September 18, 2020, was agreed upon by CARICOM heads of governments as a means of resuscitating the tourism sectors of member countries. In principle, those traveling within the CARICOM bubble are not required to take COVID-19 tests, nor to undergo a period of quarantine in order to travel to countries that are within the bubble. But as COVID-19 cases continue to rise in some member countries, those intending to travel have gone wary as to whether these territories can be deemed safe. Chastanet says the best defense is to make pre-testing a prerequisite to travel across the board.
And any country that has medium to high risk, the receiving country can put on any additional protocols they would like to. So some of the countries are going to require, an example, a St. Lucian that's traveling to their country to stay in, I don't want to say quarantine, but under, what's the other word? Not quarantine. Isolation, thank you very much. Under isolation for a couple of days and then get retested. But it will be for each one of those countries to put those protocols up so everybody understands what it's going to be. But I think that the idea that there will be this no testing or testing and you don't have to quarantine, I think that given what's currently under play right now, that's going to be suspended. And most of the countries are going to revert to at minimum pre-testing before you arrive, and then make a determination as to whether you allow them to go into quarantine or not into quarantine.
Barbados moved St. Lucia's ranking from very low risk to medium risk last week. For the Hot 7 News, Nisha Charles reporting.
Thank you, Nisha. Stay with us. There's more after the break.